Okay, our next speaker, Alex Madurowicz, direct spectroscopy of exoplanets and brown dwarfs with NIRSpec.
Well, thank you for the introduction, everybody, and so nice to be here at the Spirit of Leo. I'm going to be telling you about this project that I've been working on. It's actually kind of a double-header project, direct spectroscopy of cool exoplanets and brown dwarfs with JWST NIRSpec. This is obviously only possible due to the immense amount of collaboration effort from like a large number of people, of which the names on the slide is actually just a subset, and there are many people in the audience here that have helped contribute to this work. So let's get started. This is a little bit about what I'm going to tell you about today. We'll do a very quick introduction to the technique and the method, and then we have this sort of double header back-to-back about two different objects we're going to be looking at closely. The first one is the exoplanet 51 Eris, which was all of our analysis has been recently published in AJ, and that was from a Cycle 2 program that was led by J.B. Rufio. And then we'll be talking about this brown dwarf, GJ758b, which comes from a Cycle 3 program led by Emily Rickman. But this project is still a bit of a work in progress, and so we would ask you not to broadly distribute our results as they're still somewhat tentative. So, what is high contrast spectroscopy? And everybody here is likely familiar with doing high contrast photometry using coronagraphs to sort of block out the light from a star and observe a faint planet that's right next to it. But there's another trick that we can use to observe faint things next to bright things that doesn't rely on a coronagraph, but instead uses spectroscopic dispersion to spread the starlight very thin over the detector. And so JB was sort of one of the pioneers of this technique, and so you can see this result from his sort of 2019 work, which uses a ground-based observatory, Keck, and the instrument OSIRIS to look at the HR 8799 planets. So when you spectrally disperse the light at a high enough spectral resolution, you can see features from individual molecules in the atmosphere, which can be revealed through this cross-correlation between model templates and the data. And this method has been adapted rapidly to JWST. In Cycle 1, this shows the power of this method detecting the object HD 19467b using cross-correlation in NIRSpec. And so we're going to be applying essentially this technique, but sort of moving on to different kinds of objects. And if you would like to know more, JB has a talk tomorrow, and so he hopefully will tell you then about how this works in more detail. So let's get started with 51 Eris. Sort of towards the end of my PhD, we had this really amazing GPI spectra and this sort of orbital motion video, which you can see the planet right there. And by performing sort of an atmospheric model analysis on the combined GPI data plus the Keck photometry, there was a sort of hint that disequilibrium chemistry, in particular CO absorption features in the M band, were sort of responsible for this one photometric point. But there really wasn't enough statistical evidence to sort of prefer one model or the other, mostly because of the inability to fit the K band very well. And this sort of provided motivation for our JWST observations to look from the 3 to 5 micron range to try and investigate what was really going on at sort of higher resolution. And so we had this program accepted in Cycle 2 to observe it using the NIRSpec fixed slit. And our observing strategy had one slit pointing directly on top of the predicted position of the planet, and another slit pointing on the sort of opposite side of the PSF to build a reference stellar spectrum and also just sort of provide a null hypothesis test. And so when we go and use these molecular templates to compute cross-correlation on the data, firstly, on the speckle side, this is sort of what we see, and there's just sort of a random map of noise. But if we look on the planet side, there's this blob right where we would expect 51 Eris to be, not only in terms of its spatial position in the field of view, but also in terms of the radial velocity coordinate, which we're using to compute the cross-correlation function on the model template. And so this is essentially our detection map in phase space of 51 Eris b, and it's sort of just shy of 5 sigma. So we can use this data set to do a little bit more atmospheric analysis. What I'm showing here is a sort of model synthetic spectrum of sort of the best fit, what we would expect the spectrum to look like, and overplotted using these sort of colored regions as sort of different molecular absorption features showing you the contribution from water, methane, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide and how it's responsible for shaping the spectra. In this figure, I've sort of shown the same synthetic spectra, but with one of those molecules at a time sort of artificially removed from the atmosphere. And so we call these sort of the leave one out models, where we've sort of artificially removed the molecule and sort of seen what the atmosphere would look like without it. And so we use these leave one out templates to compute the same cross-correlation function on the data, and this is what we find. So when you have the full atmosphere model with all of the molecules included, you obviously get the best detection, and that's the black curve. And when you remove one molecule at a time, the sort of peak goes down, indicating that that molecule contributed some amount to the cross-correlation and therefore the detection. Although the largest impact on the cross-correlation comes from removing carbon monoxide and removing methane, which sort of points to these two molecules being the most relevant, most dominant absorbers in these wavelengths. As we can see from the plot, they cover the sort of widest range of wavelengths in the spectra. And so we're saying that this detection is driven primarily by methane and carbon monoxide, which is a bit unusual because both of those species are sort of competing in the sort of chemical network, and sort of that's sort of one of the sort of surprising things we learned, is that they're both coexisting, pointing to the fact that this disequilibrium chemistry is creating these higher abundances of CO. The other thing we can do with this spectra is to do a joint atmospheric analysis with the ground-based data and the sort of NIRSpec spectra at the same time. And so we get somewhat consistent answers. There's a little bit of tension, but I think that comes mostly from this sort of residual, unmodeled error covariance in the data. But overall, the fit indicates a slightly enhanced metallicity, and so that is one of the things we can point to say that this object is probably formed in sort of a planetary nature in terms of accretion in a disk as opposed to a sort of gravitational instability like collapse. So that's what I have to say about 51 Ari. Next, we're going to be talking about the brown dwarf GJ758b. This comes from a Cycle 3 survey that I mentioned was led by Emily, where there's actually 10 different benchmark brown dwarfs, which have all dynamical mass measurements. And the goal of the survey at a broad scale will be to use these dynamical mass measurements alongside the NIRSpec spectra that we've recently obtained, sort of calibrate these evolutionary models and sort of provide some really high quality data and inferences on the object's parameters. So far, we've detected 9 out of the 10 objects using NIRSpec, and there's one object which has been unfortunately rescheduled, and so we'll have to be patient and wait for that one. But I'm going to be telling you about this object, which is sort of in the bottom right corner. It's one of the oldest and the coldest object that we have in the sample, and so that makes it fairly interesting. Here is our detection map. Now, this isn't showing you the velocity coordinate because we're using the IFU instead of the slit now, and so we have 2 spatial coordinates, but there it is, a 50 sigma blob right on top of the expected position, and so bam, there it is, amazing. And yeah, it's really quite a spectacular, high quality, extremely precise data set. And so when we take a look at the actual spectra, it's just really enormously beautiful. You can see the resolved molecular features from water and carbon monoxide, and it's just, you know, the data quality, I don't have words to describe. In addition, this is such a well-studied system that there's such a broad range of photometry from 1 to 15 microns, which really means that the entire range of infrared wavelengths is super well characterized, including this MIRI photometry, which was taken by Kim Ward-Duong, and she actually has a poster about it if you would like to learn more about the MIRI coronagraphy. But this one photometric point sort of around 10 micron that I'm highlighting is indicating ammonia absorption, and so that's sort of what we'll be focusing in on a little bit further. So this is a synthetic model that I've sort of made in petite radtrans, where I've just sort of artificially dialed up the ammonia abundance to sort of visually show how changing ammonia will affect the spectrum in the vicinity of 3 micron in our NIRSpec spectra. And you can see as we turn up the ammonia, it has this effect of sort of flattening or muting or shielding this water feature that's sort of right in the same place as the ammonia and the water absorption are sort of competing. And when we look in the data at this really tiny narrow region around that water feature where there's just a handful of data points, there's this sort of preliminarily hint that that feature in the water absorption feature is not shielded as much as we might anticipate from the best fit model. And so we're thinking that this might point to slightly reduced ammonia abundances in the sort of NIRSpec channel. If we look at the molecular contribution function for, on the left, the NIRSpec wavelengths, and on the right, the MIRI wavelengths, we can see that the altitudes that are probed in these 2 different channels are somewhat different. The NIRSpec wavelengths are probing deeper around a bar, while MIRI is probing higher altitudes around 1/10 of a bar. And so there's this question that I have, which is not a conclusion, but it's more of a working hypothesis. If we have, you know, comparing here the ammonia abundances in a couple of different models, the red curves are Elf-Owl disequilibrium models, and the blue curve is sort of an equilibrium chemistry model from Shannon Vischer, that there's, these there's not enough flexibility in the KZZ parameter to greatly affect the ammonia abundance in the sort of relevant pressure wavelengths. All of the different quench layers are sort of below where it is relevant, and there's not a whole lot of degrees of freedom to like explore different ammonia abundances in the models as is. But there's this question we have, if perhaps this very old, very cold, stable object might be somewhat different. Maybe there's some kind of stable stratification where it's sort of settled down, and so this sort of inhibits vertical mixing at a certain point. The KZZ profile as a function of pressure might substantially drop off, causing the abundance to sort of be pushed back towards the equilibrium model. If you have a slightly higher ammonia abundance at these higher altitudes and a sort of reduced abundance at these lower altitudes, you might be able to explain the strong absorption in the Miri wavelengths while there's a sort of less absorption in the NIRSpec wavelengths. But this is, not confirmed. It's just sort of the question that we're investigating. So that's all I really have to tell you about today. Those are the detections, and I'll sort of leave up my conclusion slides, which sort of summarize everything. There is one thing I want to mention, is that we've recently published a series of tutorial notebooks on the breads.readthedocs webpage. So if you're interested in learning how to do this type of data analysis using NIRSpec IFU to do these types of cross-correlation functions, we've just uploaded a tutorial notebook series which walks through this analysis on a totally public data set, that Cycle 1 data set on HD19467b, so that anyone that would like to start participating in this type of analysis can join in. And we would really love to get more people involved, and also I would like to get your guys' feedback on the tutorials. Are they really good pedagogy or how they could be improved? So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Alex. This was a really cool talk. I'm just curious, this might be a naive question for the interpretation of the ammonia, right? You were saying you have to explain this. Why couldn't it be, say, like fractional cloud coverage, like you're seeing patchy clouds, and part of that atmospheric column, you see the ammonia as the relatively clear part of the atmosphere? Or am I mistaking something?
I don't think it's possible that we've ruled such an explanation out. We can consider that.
Eric Gaidos, University of Hawaii. Just another possibility to add to your collection of explanations. Ammonia is highly soluble in water, and I'm wondering whether at the lower altitudes you might actually have rain out of ammonia by droplets, sort of analogous to the helium depletion, but very different kind of object.
That's a really nice suggestion.
You could actually have preservation in the upper atmosphere, but it gets depleted in the lower atmosphere.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We should think about it.
I just had a quick question about the comparison of the effect of the different leave-one-out models on the cross-correlation function as someone who's very far from the field. I was wondering if that accounts for certain molecules just having more spectral features, so there'd be more of an effect on the cross-correlation from leaving that one out versus others.
You're asking about this plot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is true that generally the more features that you have, the greater contribution to the signal. In this analysis, we don't really have the infrastructure to do sort of like abundance inferences, but there is ongoing work in progress to incorporate these sort of types of analyses into petite rodtrons, which I know some people like William are working on right now. And so we're hopeful that once that infrastructure to do those types of modeling is possible, we can start to investigate questions like the vertical abundance and stuff, like of individual species, as opposed to just using forward models in this, very artificial, you delete the molecule from the atmosphere type of thing.
Okay, thanks so much.